Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk. I'm Rob Port. Got a busy show. My co-host Ben Hansen on as well. And our guest for the first half of the show is Secretary of State Michael Howe. We're going to talk about some ballot measure stuff. Then come up in the second half of the show. Chad Oban's going to join us, and we're going to talk about that debate last night, which was super interesting. And I don't know, maybe that'll be the first question for the Secretary of State, Michael Howe. I know you watched the debate. What'd you think?
I did, yeah. I was glad to see the governor be a little more aggressive than he was the first time. And the first time, let's not forget, he was in the hospital all evening just after tearing his Achilles tendon. So that was the circumstance from the first debate to the second debate, night and day. And I think that helped the governor when he spoke, when he was able to speak, or I should say, allowed to speak.
Yeah, we're going to get into that.
I thought he did well. And I can't say enough about how awesome it is on that stage at that platform to champion what we do in North Dakota for the whole nation to hear. It's awesome. It is really fantastic.
Well, we're going to talk about ballot measures here in a moment. There's a lawsuit that's been filed in federal court about some of our ballot measure laws. I thought I'd have you talk about that. But before we get to that, there was another ballot measure that you just approved that there's been a little bit of,
yes.
I don't know what the right word is, drama about, or a little bit of back and forth. It's a ballot measure aimed at, they want to call it the Election Integrity Act. I think that's a slogan. But it's about, it does all sorts of things. It bans early voting except for absentee ballots. It says we can only use paper ballots, although that's pretty much what we're doing anyway. It requires polling stations. It does all sorts of things. I think there's at least a couple of dozen changes to state law. Now, they had previously brought in a previous iteration of that measure that was much longer. I think that made like over 50 changes to the law by my unofficial count, and that's a hard thing to tabulate. They brought that in. The Secretary of State wrote in conjunction with the Attorney General's office, as required by state law, wrote a ballot title for it. They sent it out. They thought the ballot title was too long, so they withdrew their petition. They brought in the new one. Michael, where were we? I saw yesterday your office approved the new language, and they're good to circulate at this point.
Yes, about 5 o'clock yesterday, we approved that petition for circulation. We wrote a new title, very similar to the first one. Some of the changes that they had wanted in the petition are also included in the second petition, and then we had those in the title. We left those in there. So yeah, they are able to now gather signatures. They have until February 12th of 2024 to get 31,000 signatures to get it on the primary ballot. If they miss that deadline, they can go to July 8th, 2024 to get those 31,000 signatures. That would be on the November 2024 ballot. But we created the title, myself and Attorney General Wrigley. They weren't pleased with it because it didn't specifically say banning the voting machines in that first title. And our response was, well, that's not explicitly stated in your petition. So they went back and included that specifically in the second iteration, and then that is now in the title as well.
Michael, a couple of small details. Is there any difference in this current iteration of the ballot measure for signatures? Is anyone on the host committee significantly different from the first to the second one? Was there any change there in sponsorship?
Yeah, Ben, there's a few changes. I think the first iteration, they had 79 or 80 members of the sponsoring committee. This one has around 50. By volume 25, so they are well above that threshold. But yeah, it's fewer committee members, and that could be timing of getting affidavits to our office and approve. I don't know if, and maybe a couple of those people that aren't on the second iteration, maybe they're not supporting it, but we haven't heard that.
It wasn't expressed to you one way or another why there were less?
No.
Is that, just for context for folks, because not everybody knows the behind the scenes on ballot measures, is that number of sponsors typical? Is it more than usual? Is it less than usual? What do you usually see?
So in my short time here in office, we've approved three petitions for circulation. Those two prior, if I'm remembering correctly, were 25, maybe 30, but this was significantly more than what I have seen.
It was a big group. I was surprised at it. I don't know why what having a sponsoring committee that large. I don't know that it helps or hinders. It's more people that you have to get in the filing process. The more people you have to get involved, but beyond that, if you're on the sponsoring committee, you're not really obliged to do anything once you're on the sponsoring committee. So right. that was kind of interesting. All right, let's move on, because the other kind of the reason I wanted to have you on the show was to talk about a federal lawsuit that's been filed, and it's challenging. And this is with a different ballot measure committee. So this is the measure committee that is they're pushing a ballot measure that would put in North Dakota law put age limits on Congress. Now, obviously, that's a hot button issue right now. I have a feeling that a lot of North Dakotans would probably, with Dianne, Senator Dianne Feinstein and some of her struggles in the news. President Joe Biden's age is certainly an issue. Frankly, Donald Trump's age is an issue. Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi. There's a lot of questions about people who are they just in office too long? But this isn't what we're about to talk about. Isn't really about that issue. The issue is that the folks who are organizing the measure have now filed suit against North Dakota over whether or not they should be allowed to hire or to have out-of-state signature collectors. Currently, the North Dakota Constitution says that if you want to circulate petitions, you have to be an elector of the state of North Dakota, which basically means you have to be able to vote in North Dakota. That means you have to be a North Dakota resident. What they argue in their lawsuit is that violates the First and 14th Amendments. Collecting signatures is exercising the First Amendment, that your First Amendment rights, and therefore this prohibition is unconstitutional. So first of all, Michael, what did you make of this lawsuit when it first got filed? What's your reaction to it right off the bat?
Well, my initial reaction was you were the one to tell me, Rob. I hadn't been informed of this at all. You reached out to our office seeking comments, and I'd ask, what the heck are you talking about? And so just finally yesterday, late afternoon, we were officially served the papers of the lawsuit. I don't want to comment specifically on specific aspects of the lawsuit, because it's kind of our stance with pending litigation. I think this is our 5th or 6th lawsuit now. Since I've been in office for a multitude of different things. But if you were to ask the North Dakota public, I would say they would reject the idea of people from New Jersey, New York, California, leading efforts to change our state's most sacred document. I don't think I'm on a limb by saying that. I think that'd be overwhelmingly that they would say this is North Dakota's Constitution. As North Dakotans, they are the only people that can change the state constitution. The state legislature cannot change the Constitution. Only the people. Our state's Constitution is for North Dakotans by North Dakotans. The legislature can propose ballot measures to change the Constitution, but at the end of the day, it's the citizens of North Dakota that have the final say. As a candidate, Ben, you've ran for office. I don't know if I'd feel very comfortable having out-of-state people voting in our elections or voting for who our elected leaders are. There's a reason why we only let qualified electors run our petition process.
And Michael, as you said, I completely agree with you, and I cannot imagine if you did a quick poll or put on a statewide ballot. I'm guessing that would be an 80-20 issue at the least in favor of what you just said. North Dakotans need to circulate petitions for North Dakota constitutional changes, for crying out loud. And there's we have some border state communities, and there can be some ambiguity there, but I just don't. To me, it doesn't matter. But supposedly I'm an interviewer, so I need to come up with a question for you here. What are the next steps in this lawsuit for your office, and what proactive actions, if any, will you be taking as Secretary of State? I honestly don't know what your role as Secretary of State is for this, so can you let folks know what it is?
Well, in reference to the lawsuit, I'm named in the lawsuit, as is Attorney General Wrigley. So typically in lawsuits where I am named, the Attorney General's office is our attorneys to defend the state, defend the office, defend me. But because Attorney General Wrigley is also named, it's kind of in their court to find outside counsel now to defend our state constitution and defend both of us. So haven't heard what the next steps are on that, Ben. From an office standpoint, we're going to function as is, and nothing changes. Our state constitution says what it says. Our state law says what it says. So really nothing from a functionality standpoint regarding petitions or anything changes at all.
One thing that was really interesting in the complaint, first of all, they said that they're going to start using, they say right in the complaint, we feel this is unconstitutional. We're going to use out-of-state signature collectors. So that really sets up kind of a showdown once it comes time to I guess to approve whether or not this is going to be on the ballot. They're explicitly saying we're going to do something that we're acknowledging is against what the Constitution says, but we're also simultaneously arguing in court that we feel that part of the North Dakota Constitution is unconstitutional under the federal Constitution. So that's interesting. You're normally, because I was thinking about that, like, okay, well, they're just going to go out and I guess break the law as it's currently written. But that normally, like there would be nothing to stop them from doing that. Even normally, that sort of thing doesn't come up to the petition review process. Am I understanding that right?
That's exactly right, Rob. So, people can gather signatures however they want. It's our expectation that people that are doing this are doing it lawfully. And so when they submit their signatures to our office for review, we will be looking to see who is witnessing the signatures. Were they North Dakota electors? Are these real signatures on the signature sheets? Those are all things we will take into account should they submit the signatures.
Michael, you've been Secretary of State for a while now. I'm sure you've gone to Secretary of State conferences. There are associations for most of these statewide offices, and Secretary of State's a common one for all states to elect. I'm sure you've spoken to many other Secretary of States of both our neighboring states and even on the coast. Do you know of other states' laws, if it's common to have what I think is a common sense law in North Dakota, to have citizens or eligible voters of that state passing out certificates? And specifically, have you ever met the Secretary of State of California? Have you ever spoken to I don't know who that person is, Shirley Weber, it looks like, about what their statewide ballot measures are like? Because I know that state's kind of ran, unfortunately, in my opinion, by statewide ballot measures. Can you speak to those things?
Yeah, it seems like California, there's really no reason to have a legislature, just vote on every piece of legislation. But to answer your first question, Ben, no, I am not aware of what other states' provisions are for changing the Constitution and signature thresholds. I have a very good relationship with our neighboring states, Steve Simon of Minnesota, Monet Johnson of South Dakota, Christy Jacobson of Montana. But the petition process and who can qualify to gather signatures has not come up in conversation. But as soon as we shut off this computer, that's something I'm going to look into.
Well, now, and you let me say this so I can get in trouble, not you. Now I'm wondering if there's not precedent for this other places, and they're trying to make North Dakota their little petri dish to set this as legal precedent to go to Uniform Laws Commission with. That I would be very curious about.
Well, I think that was absolutely it. The context of this ballot measure from when it was, if you look at the people behind it, now I'm going to go into some backstory here. That's a little bit nerdy, but the people behind it
backstory on this podcast?
Yeah, weird, right? The story behind it is it's all about term limits. So a group called U.S. Term Limits was part of which by the way bankrolled the term limits ballot measure last cycle, that the chairman of this ballot, the age limits ballot measure committee, and also a plaintiff in this lawsuit, Jared Hendricks, he was also the chairman of the term limits measure last cycle. U.S. Term Limits was the plaintiff in a United States Supreme Court case in the 90s. I think it was 95. Don't quote me on it. But essentially, what ended up with that case is the U.S. Supreme Court struck down state level term limits, and their argument was that the U.S. Constitution controls the requirements for serving in Congress, not state law, because Congress is essentially a federal body. It's up to the federal Constitution to set, what age can you be, any other requirements that we might want to put in there. U.S. term limits didn't like that. Now, Clarence Thomas, who was a justice in the 90s, he had a big dissent against that case. Obviously, I think what's happening is the U.S. term limits folks, many of whom are also involved in this ballot measure, they're banking on this court, which I think they're probably perceiving, not inaccurately, that this court is probably more in line with Justice Thomas's point of view than that previous court. So I think with the all along, because what they're proposing is not all that different from term limits, right? Term limits is saying a member of Congress can't serve more than 2 terms. An age limit saying you can't serve in Congress if you're over this age. They're both dealing with the same issue area, and if one's unconstitutional, the other's unconstitutional. I think they want to blow that up. What's interesting is that one of the plaintiffs in this lawsuit too is a group, the president of which was the president of U.S. term limits back during that U.S. Supreme Court case. So, I mean, this is all, I think, to Ben's point, this whole thing is about creating, I think, litigation to strike down laws that these folks don't like. And I mean, I'm not saying everybody has the courts available to them. I'm just saying that's pretty clearly their motivation is, yes, North Dakota is intended to be their petri dish for their litigation. I mean, all the connections are all there. That's obviously what they're angling for.
Well, and I'll say this, Rob. I've got the stats here. We've had 274 measures that required petitions that went to the ballot. 274.
Since I'm assuming that's like since statehood or since
1914, I believe.
Okay. Well,
and can I ask, because I actually don't know, what is the proposed age limit that this group would like to put on congressional members?
So the petition is to require that anyone who will be 80 years old or older at any point during a term while serving in the North Dakota congressional delegation is barred from doing so. So if you are 77 years old and you are seeking a seat in the U.S. Senate to represent North Dakota, you would not be allowed to run because you would be 83 by the end of your time of term limits.
And states are, well, actually, no, I don't know, Michael. Are states allowed to set those kind of rules and parameters around federal offices? And I ask federal because obviously the states run their own state elections, for instance, yours for Secretary of State or for Agriculture Commissioner, on and so forth. Are they allowed to do that with the 2 United States senators and 1 congressional seat that North Dakota has? I honestly don't know.
I think we're going to find out.
Okay.
Well, I would say that by that U.S. term, that 1990 Supreme Court case, I would say that the controlling precedent from the courts is no. That sort of thing. If you want an age limit or that sort of thing, you have to amend the U.S. Constitution, not a state constitution. Go ahead, Rob. Frankly, I mean, philosophically, I think that's the right way. I don't want America to be a patchwork of different. I mean, I think the requirements for serving in Congress should be uniform. If we want to change those, we should change them for the whole nation, not one state at a time here and there. I think the Supreme Court got it right, but clearly they're trying to strike that down.
Michael, can I ask you, what is your opinion, or do you have one, if it is true that North Dakota could set this and then say it did, hypothetically, this age limit for serving in Congress, could that then be applied to a presidential contest within an individual state? And where I'm going with that is, currently, Joe Biden, the incumbent who is running and is ahead in all polls for his party to run for president in 2024, exceeds that age threshold. Donald Trump, who is the front runner of the Republican nomination field right now, who knows what happens, but say he gets to be the nominee, you would have a case where both, if it did impact that, both nominees for both major parties would then, in my mind, maybe not be allowed to be on the statewide ballot in the state of North Dakota. Is that a wacky hypothetical I'm coming up with, or is that maybe a real consequence to a ballot measure like this? What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, the reality is the courts would have a say in that. And I think the courts would probably agree with Rob, but who knows? I'm not an attorney. But I mean, my opinion of it, it's tough to watch some of our elder leaders as they become more frail. Maybe, I mean, you get old, people get old. But I would also contend that's why we have elections. The people should decide, you know what, Dianne Feinstein, I voted for her, 4 times. I can't do it again. She's getting old. Mitch McConnell saying that voted for him. I think he's failing. We need new blood. That would be my take. To me, this takes the power away from the voters of being able to choose who you want representing you. If you feel like how old's Chuck Grassley?
In his 80s, I know that.
I think he might be even in his 90s, Ben. So if the people of Iowa want to keep electing him, go for it. If there's people that think he's too old, they can vote for somebody else. But,
Chuck Grassley is 90 years old as we speak right now. So,
and isn't Dianne Feinstein 90? I believe. If she's not, she's like 80. She's on the cusp. But
and the thing is, philosophically, I think this should be left up to voters. I don't think we need a law about this because not everybody ages the same either. I mean, some people are much more vigorous into their late ages than other people. Chuck Grassley's still a pretty vigorous guy at 90. He's I think even older than Senator Feinstein, who's clearly in decline. And I mean, really, personally,
you know what? I'd actually like to. Sorry, I'm totally interrupting you, but I even like to give some praise on our North Dakota legislators. Who are, I believe there are at least 2 who are I would point out, who are senior citizens. If you want to find out about North Dakota healthcare policy, how it impacts both the private sector, public sector, federal regulation, and mandates, if you talk to either Senators Judy Lee or Kathy Hogan, you will learn something. I don't care who you are, what background you're from. You will learn something from those 2 in their time in the legislature. They're sharp as tacks, and they've been reelected multiple times in their districts for good reason. They know what the heck they're talking about. There is some wisdom and age here, and I don't want to just dismiss. Neither of you are dismissing that, but I don't want that to get lost in this conversation either.
Yeah. I mean, there's value to the experience. So, again, I think it should be left up to the voters. But, I mean, back to the question at hand, we kind of got off talking about the ballot measure itself, which is obviously a good fodder for debate. But the issue at hand is, over this lawsuit is they are using what they've said in their legal filing. They're going to use that to I got a text message. Now I completely lost my train of thought. They're using out-of-state petitioners. And I don't know. I mean, philosophically, I have a problem with that too. I think North Dakota, I don't think it violates anyone's First Amendment any more than us restricting the vote to North Dakotans violates anybody's 14th or First Amendments. And I think, I mean, listen, we all think of the initiated, and I don't like the initiated measure process, but to the extent that it's going to exist, should be reserved to the citizens of North Dakota. That's, I think, what everybody thinks about this is it's North Dakota citizens. They have an issue, so they work together, they gather a signature, maybe they raise some money, and then they put their issue on the ballot and they campaign for it. That should be reserved to North Dakotans, not a bunch of hired mercenaries from Texas or Arizona or wherever these people are coming from. I just don't. And you know what's kind of amazing is right in their filing, they make an economic argument. They went through and they did the math on the number of signatures that they've collected for their measure so far and how much they've paid out in, I guess, in hourly wages to the people collecting those signatures. And this is a direct quote from the filing. It says, as of the end of last month, the average total cost to collect each signature has been an astronomical $13.25 per signature. And then they go on and they estimate that if we allowed out-of-state petitioners, who apparently are much better at collecting signatures and do so much more efficiently than North Dakotans do. And by the way, I kind of think it's like it's a Midwest nice thing. Like North Dakotans are like we take no for an answer, right? Like, will you sign my petition? No, okay, right? So I don't know. They've got petitioners who work much more efficiently. In their filing, they said that they could save as much as $208,000. So I mean, there they are, just kind of explicitly making the argument. This is about hiring paid mercenaries to come into North Dakota and put issues on the ballot. I mean, North Dakotans, is that what you want?
Well, I'll say this. Petition groups workforce challenges is not North Dakota citizens' crisis.
I couldn't agree with you more. And Michael, we're running short on time with you. I'm asking this a little out of order, but I think it's a directly relevant question to your office. We were speaking right at the beginning about the ballot measure, the second version of a ballot measure to change how North Dakota votes. And an interesting aspect, I think, that I'd love to hear from you about is that it is a petition for a statewide ballot measure that has many, many facets. I think at one point, Rob and I counted, it was dozens in the original one, dozens of things that changes to state law in one vote, yes or no, for the North Dakota voter. You spent some time in the House. I believe you spent 6 years there, so you were experienced. You saw what it was like voting on bills that had multiple pieces to them. Sometimes they get called Christmas tree bills because someone is tacking something on. They might get called, sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it's not. Do you have any opinions one way or another as either a former legislator and now currently a Secretary of State who can present and testify on bills to the House? Would you have any opinions on limiting the number of aspects or things a statewide ballot measure does to better, in my opinion, it would be better informing of the North Dakota voter having to go on individual aspects, yes or no, instead of a lump sum? I'm wondering if you either agree with that, view that as your role as Secretary of State with voter education. What are your thoughts there?
Well, the people of North Dakota will be able to answer that question in November of 2024. The legislature put Senate Concurrent Resolution 4013 past both chambers of the legislature. That's going to go to the voters. Part of that resolution states constitutional measures should be limited to one single subject. Now, it's a little ironic that same measure, when it's limited to one single subject, also has two other provisions to it. One would be that constitutional measures must pass the June primary and then advance the general election, much like candidates like you and I, Ben. And the third provision of that would be raising the signature threshold from 4% to 5%. So that will be that question will be before the voters in November of 2024.
Well, gentlemen, I think we're going to put a pin in it there. Michael, thank you so much for your time coming on. Certainly appreciate it. And we'll see how this lawsuit plays out.
Hi there. My name is James Wallner. I produce and host the podcast Dakota Spotlight, a true crime podcast that tackles historical and unsolved crimes in the upper Midwest. Follow along with me as we search for a missing girl, attempt to solve a 45-year-old murder, and much, much more. That's Dakota Spotlight Podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts, or at inforum.com/podcasts.
All right, welcome to the second half of the show. Just finished up with Secretary of State Michael Howe, now joined by Chad Oban, in addition to Ben Hansen. And Ben, first of all, I mean, you've seen some of the stuff about the lawsuit about allowing out-of-state petitioners. I don't know. I mean, part of me is I mean, listen, I have a very different view of the initiative measure process than I think you two and probably most other people in North Dakota. I don't like it. I don't think that enacting complex policy at the ballot box is a good idea, but at the very least, if we're going to do it, I think the process should be reserved to North Dakotans. I think already the door's open to deep-pocketed interests coming in and basically buying their way onto the ballot. Now, our provision that protects the process so that only North Dakotans can circulate petitions, even that's going to be open. And anybody who wants to pass a law in North Dakota so that maybe they can, create an opportunity to litigate some issue, which, by the way, is exactly what's going on with U.S. term limits. They want North Dakota to be their mechanism for putting their issue back before the U.S. Supreme Court. I don't know how many tax dollars that's going to cost us, but I mean, I don't think it's right. I think if North Dakota's process for changing North Dakota's law should be reserved to North Dakotans, period.
I alluded to this in our conversation with Michael, and he said that he was going to look this up, and I should too. I'm wondering how many other states have those same requirements.
Well, they allude
it's all of them. Well, it's all of them or more.
Yeah.
Then what is going on here is there is a precedent for many regulations, ideas, and so forth. If you want to build something nationally as a group, you go to a lower population state because cynically in their eyes, we're a cheaper date to play with because we take less money to get things
We're going to be a real cheap date.
And then once you set that legal precedent, you go to something that legislators know a lot about, but not a lot of people wind up hearing about, which is the Uniform Laws Commission. Present that as something that should be precedented and try and get your way into each individual state's Uniform Laws Commission to see if they can't true up, for lack of a better word, or unify how the states run themselves. Now, with something as probably fundamental as this, I don't think they'd be able to get through there. But the point is, it's not an unprecedented strategy to try and pass something in a small state and pass it elsewhere. So we could be being used as a petri dish, as a testing lab. And if that were the case, I'd be very offended.
Ben, we are. I mean, you keep saying that. We are being used as a petri dish. This is not in question. This is absolutely their goal.
So I would just say, obviously, I wasn't part of the conversation with Michael Howe, but I've got a request, and that is that people like Jared Hendricks should stop making it easy for people like Rob Port to demonize this process. This is a process that I think is very important. I think we can look at tweaking it. But like when I first saw that, Rob, I think I texted you that said, is Jared in this group trying to get rid of this process as an option? Because I think he's doing everything that people like you demonize people for doing.
I think he's cashing paychecks. And in my defense, the things that I've been warning about are happening now, Chad.
Well, that's exactly right. Maybe they should stop doing those things. And I mean, if you can't collect 31,000 signatures to get something on the ballot,
using North Dakota citizens,
and hell, I would go as far as saying using North Dakota volunteers.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously, if
people are really passionate about the issue, right? And I don't. I mean, when most people think about the initiated measure process, they don't think about a bunch of paid mercenaries who may or may not even believe in the issue, just out there, carpet bombing people to collect as many signatures as they can. And that's what this is a recipe for. We keep opening this up. Every concert you go to, every state fair or county fair or whatever, you are going to be inundated by people with petitions asking you to sign. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about here in the second half, though. That's going to be an interesting issue going forward. Here in the second half, we're going to talk about last night's presidential debate, at which
I thought, call it that.
Last night's shouting match among the also-rans. I just kept looking at that stage all night, and I kept looking at all of this. I was thinking the stakes for this are so low because Donald Trump, who's not even bothering to attend, after I think this morning, or maybe it was late last night, I don't know when, basically called for the RNC not to hold any more debates because, as far as he's arguing, the race is over. Maybe he's right. Maybe he's right. I don't know. I'm still interested. It's such a unique situation. I do want to see the states start voting, but I don't know. It was last night it was like, oh, Nikki Haley's really doing good. Maybe she'll move up to 8% of the polls.
If she kept fighting over gas taxes in South Carolina with Tim Scott for maybe 5 more minutes, I think she could get all the way up to maybe even 10%. Who knows? What are these people doing? What is going on? No one looked like they were striving for the finish line there. They were all distracted. There was just squirrel all night.
Yeah.
And who's feeding these candidates these lines, these slogans? Build Back Broker, Donald Duck, there are people getting paid 6 figures to consult.
That was lame.
These candidates. Where's that money going towards?
I don't know.
This is
all the writers are on strike. That's what.
Nicely done.
Very topical port. Gold star for me. That was very good.
Yeah, I mean, if you're self-grading yourself, I mean, come on, bring it to the people. I mean, I tend to agree. I mean, I watched the debate slightly on delay last night, and I didn't see a whole lot of future presidents up there. I thought the moderators asked decent questions, but completely lost control. And I didn't understand what they were doing in terms of trying to smack down Doug Burgum as the people in the middle of the stage were screaming.
I got the feeling they didn't want him there. I mean, that was the feeling I got. They didn't want him on the stage.
Weirdly ornery about just one candidate, and for no reason that I could quite understand.
And it leads to one of the problems that Burgum has in these things is I saw somebody tweet, I think it was Flickertail, that Doug Burgum tries to get the whole state of the state into a 1-minute segment or a 1-minute answer. He talks so fast and he talks about things that I know what he's talking about as a North Dakotan, but I don't think the national audience often understands what he's talking about. And he doesn't know when he's going to get to talk again. So he tries to get all this stuff in, and it doesn't make him look good. I think he had some good answers last night, but I think it was a tough.
Every candidate answers the question they want to answer, not necessarily the questions they're asked. But at one point, Burgum was talking about SAT scores in North Dakota when he was asked about parents being notified about the identity of a student. At one point, Nikki Haley got asked what she's going to do for police recruitment because recruitment numbers are down. And she finished that answer by talking about combating companies in China. I mean, it was just it was just word salad from everybody.
Or when Mike Pence got asked the question about healthcare and he babbled about something for a long time, and finally the moderator said, "So we're going to overturn Obamacare?" I mean, like literally not responding to the question.
And she asked if Obamacare is here to stay, and he wouldn't answer. I mean, you're running to be president of the United States. That is the federal healthcare law right now. You don't have an answer on that? You don't have some opinions about that? And you're a former vice president? Come on. By the way, the medium is the messenger here, and whoever at the RNC is deciding we shouldn't have these on cable and just have these streaming on YouTube instead of this weird, obscure, faulty Rumble service that I was stuck with and having to refresh all
It was
night,
also streamed on the Fox News website. I didn't want to give Bumble any business, but you could click over to the Fox News website and you had to give them your email. But
I tried that last time. It didn't work. So that might be operator error on my part. Okay. But still, just run them on cable like we used to. Just
I thought it was.
I watched it on Fox News last night. It was on cable.
It was on Fox Business.
On Fox Business? Okay.
Fox News.
Was it on both? Okay. I don't have cable, so I always have to stream. I didn't want to go to Rumble because I think Rumble is a epicenter for a lot of very ugly stuff.
Yes, it is. I clicked around. I found Donald Trump Jr.'s show, and it's exactly what you think it is.
Rumble's not a very good place. So I don't know. It's such an unusual situation. So, Chad, one of the things you said is that you're looking on the stage. You didn't see a lot of future presidents there. Obviously, before any of these candidates can take on Joe Biden. And I don't know. I think Doug Burgum would be a very good president. You know, I see a couple of people.
I mean, of those folks, Doug Burgum clearly was the one from my perspective. Maybe Nikki Haley to a certain extent, but I don't see a lot beyond that.
No. But before any of them can take on Joe Biden, they have to win the primary. And right now it's Donald Trump's to lose. And I think obviously the narrative that's coming from Trump right now is just end it. I'm so far in the lead. The race is over. But we're also in a situation, the hits keep coming for his legal challenges. You have the criminal indictments. Now you have the state of New York basically saying he committed fraud by inflating, basically lying about the size of the value of his properties and the values of his businesses,
which wasn't brought up at debate where he is the front runner
which is remarkable. Although the moderators didn't ask about it. A couple of candidates made the point that Donald Trump should have been on the stage. They're right. But it's I think what a lot of them are hoping is that when it comes time to actually vote in Iowa and New Hampshire, maybe the votes will be different from the polls. Now, I don't know how likely that is, but also I don't know when we've ever been in this situation before. So I don't know.
Generally, Rob, polls aren't off by 50 points, though, right?
No. Well, and not just any one poll.
There's the precedent of the narrative, I'd say, in 2008 on the Democratic side was that it's definitely Hillary or it's definitely Hillary's to lose until people started voting. But to Chad's point, it was never a 50-point gap in the early states. And now it's, sometimes it's 30 or 40 points, but it's well into the double digits. Everyone else is single digits or lower, with DeSantis sometimes creeping up to, I think, maximum 29%-ish in some of these states. You need to make a real argument as to how you can get there. I don't think anybody did. Chad, actually, I want to counter your point. I don't think the moderators did ask good questions last night. I thought they were all over the place. And the ridiculous final question where they try to vote somebody off the island gave DeSantis his best moment I've seen him have. You could tell he truly felt what he was saying off the cuff. Like, I respectfully refuse to do that. This isn't a reality TV show. Voters decide this. I'm not going to vote who has to leave. And I think, Rob, you made the point that seemed to be like it was aimed at Doug Burgum. I don't
think
even
it
want to give it that much strategic credit. I think they were just trying to get ratings. I thought it was
It's
very
a reality show thing. Yeah, they want him to write him on the thing like they do on what's that? Boy, I'm really showing how much I watch TV. Survivor.
Sure.
They want to it's just lame. It's just lame and stupid and good on them for not playing ball.
Basic questions about basic federal government policies. What's your plan for Social Security over your first 4 years in office as president? What's your plan for Medicare and Medicaid?
I think
What's your number one through three foreign policy prerogatives?
Ben, I think they to a certain extent did when they asked about energy and they asked about tech and they asked about education. I think one of, talking more about Governor Burgum, who I think some of his answers were good. I particularly liked when he talked about you bring the teachers union to the table, which he does in North Dakota,
which
while
is
everybody
true.
else is saying they're the worst people in the world. But I think
I did like all the stuff about sleeping with teachers too. That was bizarre.
Yeah, that was cringy. Not as cringy as Mike Pence. I mean, geez, 38 years.
That's gross on both their parts. What are they? Yeah. And it's a weird personalized attack on Joe Biden. That's just gross. Sure. I don't understand what it. Yeah.
But I think after the last debate, the biggest problem Governor Burgum has is what people are talking about. And I looked before this, went through a bunch of pundits, and you can sort of categorize what people are saying about Burgum in these articles with they don't mention him at all, which is a problematic. They categorize him as one of the losers of the debate last night. I mean, one of the Politico people said, who had the worst night? Poor Burgum. After qualifying at the last minute, he tried the hardest to insert himself into the debate by interrupting, but he got very few questions directed to him and some scolding for when he did try to interject. That is either no mentions or feeling bad for him.
Yeah.
That's not helpful to his case.
Well, and one of the problems, too, is that we're still grading debate performance based on how much they talked about policy on the assumption that the voters give a rip about policy right now, which I don't think they do. I don't know that there are many Republican primary voters who are sitting watching these debates saying, I really want to hear what these candidates have to say about education or a hot button culture issue like, trans kids in schools or whatever. Parental notification for trans kids. I think that was the question. I don't know that there's a lot of voters who are sitting there saying, boy, I really want to get informed on these issues. I think they want to be entertained. I think they really, to Ben's point about Fox trying to get ratings with the Survivor vote them off the island thing, I think that's what voters really want is they want The Apprentice or something on there. They want, a sideshow. And that's not how we should be deciding who's going to lead America in the free world. But that's the priorities of the voters right now.
And under that theory, Nikki Haley's line about being dumber after hearing Vivek talk, I feel dumber after watching 2 hours of that debate last night. And I recorded it, put my kid to bed, and was about a half hour behind the whole thing. And I had to convince myself, knowing I was going to be talking about it today, I had to convince myself to watch it. If I wasn't going to be on this podcast, I don't think I would have made it through the 2 hours.
So you're saying that Rob and I got you through those 2 hours? Is what
you did. Just the thinking about not wanting to look like an idiot with you two really made me push through.
He ate his broccoli.
For Nikki Haley, and I cannot imagine being in her spot. It's a little bit of a reminiscent of being Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg a little bit, but much worse in my opinion. I can't imagine being a two-term governor of South Carolina, then an ambassador for a presidential administration, and having Pharma Bro pop up and say, we need to talk about what's going on in our party, knowing that he's only voted in, I think, 2 elections in his lifetime, and talking about how the solutions he has of the world talking like a freshman philosophy major. I'm glad she called him out. I'm glad she swatted him down. His whole apology tour, Reagan's 11th commandment thing, I don't think worked. I think his moment in the sun's probably gone now. And
I think actually the damage he did with himself, again, understanding where the Republican base is at, is he apologized. Right? You're not supposed to do that. You don't apologize. That's not the Trumpian way. The Trumpian way is to be a boor and a jackhole and then never say you're sorry for it. Always blame everybody else for how they react to it.
And I'm not sure the country's much better off for seeing the internal South Carolina Republican fight play out on stage between Tim Scott.
I had never heard about this curtains thing before, and I had to go Google it.
I literally still don't understand it, and I kind of want to just keep myself.
I think it was a scandal about like office furnishings and how much they cost. I think that's, from what I Googled a little bit, I'm pretty sure that's what it was. But every striking auto worker in Michigan was sitting there with bated breath wondering, did she return the curtains? What frustrates me is that there is a real opportunity here to have a substantive debate and to offer conservative policy solutions for what America is facing right now. I mean, the fact that this was held at the Ronald Reagan Library, which, by the way, I can endorse. I've been there. It's a beautiful place. I don't care what your politics are. They have the Air Force One he flew around in that you could walk through. I mean, it's very, very cool. And while I was there, they had the Magna Carta was visiting. It's not a permanent installation, but they had like a display there. I got to see that. It was fantastic. It was a great place to visit. But I'm thinking of Reagan's legacy. I mean, Reagan united the country. Reagan won in one of his elections, won 49 out of 50 states. Right? Whatever else you want to think about him, he offered conservative policies that united the country. And by the way, he was a lot more moderate than he gets credit for on a lot of issues, not least of which is immigration, which we had. I mean, they were on the cusp of
which they actually did reference that.
They did, but they were talking about about invading Mexico.
Part of the poor performance, I thought, on the debate monitors part was supposedly it was supposed to be Reagan themed. This was what the party was like. How do we unite the party? And that actually, they did grab the precedent of Reagan granting amnesty to 3 million immigrants in the 1980s and mentioning that no president had done that since. It was an interesting spring point. I don't think the candidates really did anything with it. But outside of that, I felt like the way they played Reagan's legacy, where they just sort of played random out of context clips that I don't really think meant anything. It wasn't informative. It wasn't like, it didn't mean anything. Yeah. The format was so poorly cobbled together. It just felt piecemeal.
Well, because they weren't in control.
Library, I mean, they saying they love Ronald Reagan. So why not talk about that more? Why not make that a through line? Anything.
I think they had the Reagan clips prepared, and then they lost complete control over where the debate went, and then they used the clips anyway, even though the debate was 3 miles off the tracks they laid.
That makes some sense.
So,
to me.
Rob, you mentioned Reagan in 49 states. I mean, the one thing that President Reagan did, and while I'm old, I'm not old enough to remember much about the Reagan presidency, but an optimistic vision for the future of the country.
Right.
And we did not see that last night.
No.
There was a lot of hate, a lot of discussing immigrants and trans kids and all kinds of things. It was not a message about bringing this country together and a bright future. The shining light. What's the shining light? Shining city on the
shining
hill.
city on a hill.
Yeah, we did not get that last night at all.
No, I mean, Tim Scott tried. He said some things about it. I think Mike Pence said things about it, but they came off as kind of throwaway lines, and they were out of place.
Slogany. It was very prepared.
Slogany. Yeah.
Tim Scott said, "Well, you say we're a country in disrepair or something. We're just a country in retreat under Biden." And it was just these interchangeable synonyms, and I was like, who do you expect to grab something from that? What am I even supposed to grab from it?
But seriously, the Donald Duck thing and how Chris Christie was so proud of himself for delivering that line. I mean, I think that summarizes what's wrong with this country.
The thing is, the Donald Duck line, I think, can work if it's delivered differently, because I understand what it was intended to do. It's intended to clap. I mean, that's what Trump does, right? Like, he comes up with these silly nicknames for people. So he was and the fact that he was ducking the stage. I understand what Christie was trying to do, and I do think that there's a context in which maybe that can land. But man, again, it was
the problem is Donald Trump really is a grade school bully, and he really likes those things. So when he's saying it, it's from a place of sincerity. When Chris Christie's saying it, it's because he's imitating Donald Trump.
Right.
Yeah, he's got a little bully to him too.
He does. If anybody on that stage could land it would be Chris Christie, but he did not land it. And also, maybe the lesson there is, don't lower yourself to Trump's level. Be better than Trump. Although, again, that begs the question, do the voters want anybody to be better than Trump? Because it sure seems like they just want Donald Trump.
And Mike Pence should stop trying to deliver jokes. That's not who he is. It makes me uncomfortable whenever he makes a joke. So he, again,
it feels kind of like when your pastor tells you a dirty joke, right? It's like, what are you doing?
Hey,
or like when your grandma flips you off or something. Like what?
what? Ron DeSantis also needs to stop pretending to be angry, because he feels like a white collar guy who's like just got a divorce is trying to get into a fight at a biker bar, and the regulars there are just like, "Hey man, are you okay? Like, stop. We're not going to fight you. Stop."
You can almost see like the lines of code running in his eyeballs, like the situation calls for anger.exe.
What I'm sad about too is you have a few people on there. I'm thinking Tim Scott, Burgum, and Nikki Haley rather, who have impressive resumes, like on paper biographies. In Tim Scott and Doug Burgum's case, in the private sector, I actually don't know about Nikki Haley's private sector experience. I just don't. But Tim Scott was a very successful franchisee owner of, I think, State Farm Insurance, one of the insurance brands in South Carolina. I think he was the biggest one in state history. That's a serious entrepreneurial accomplishment in his life before becoming a U.S. senator.
He's a successful black man from the South too, which is not shouldn't be dismissed either. But
he holds some record within State Farm Insurance or whichever insurance company he was with. And then Doug Burgum with the software success that we know about in North Dakota. And none of those biographies, none of that gets talked about on stage now. We're at this place in politics where we just don't care about those things.
Just to add on to that point, that this was entertainment and not intended to be substantive, is the fact that they start talking about energy. They don't talk to the guy on the stage from the energy producing state.
None of those refused to allow him to talk about it. That was actually weird. Weird and petty.
None of those people represent or live in or are from energy producing state. Doug Burgum knows energy policy forward and backwards. Let's hear what he has to say. Also, we start talking about TikTok. Who's the only guy? Congressman Kelly Armstrong tweeted this out. Maybe let the guy who's the only person on stage who started a $1 billion software company, maybe let him talk about software and tech.
Yeah, and I thought, Burgum clearly was trying to be more aggressive after the first debate and trying to get points in. I thought the energy conversation where they let DeSantis go off about how he was in West Texas and he talked to some people who were in West Texas. And it's like, again, talk to the guy who's actually been in Western North Dakota, who talks to people who are actually pumping the oil.
Who has people who pumping oil voting for him.
Yeah. It was something. And again, every time he would try to get in and say, hey, I'm the tech guy here, and they would just shoot him down. Or when he tried to talk about childcare. I mean, I thought he probably oversold North Dakota. They did invest in childcare. We're nowhere near where we need to be in childcare, but he's actually done something on these issues. Right. It would be good to hear about them. But again, when it finally gets to him and he tries to get 18 different points into 1 minute, it gets lost. And again, I don't blame Doug Burgum for that. Doug Burgum's a super smart guy and actually has thoughts on all these things. And to his credit, mostly tried to answer the questions that were being asked.
I think it's symptomatic of a party that's not looking for these ideas or answers from people. Right now, we have it set up so that the moderators want ratings from the also-rans, and the guy who's number one isn't coming to the table. It's a real disservice.
Yeah, I mean, you're at a point where the end. I think when the Democrats have their next presidential competition, it'll be the same way. Where I mean, it's almost like the chair of the party is like the president of the NFL, and they're negotiating like TV rights for their games. I mean, that's where we're at with this stuff, where it's infotainment, and it's a problem. And again, this isn't a problem that starts. I think everybody on that stage, from the moderators to the politicians, are all reacting to an expectation from the voters, which is that we want to be entertained. We don't want to hear anybody's boring ideas about what in the hell we're going to do about Social Security or Medicare, or what we're going to do about Ukraine or Russia or China. Nobody really wants to hear about that. Everybody pretends like they want to hear about that because that's tradition, and we all know that that's what this is supposed to be about, but nobody really wants that. We want Vivek Ramaswamy to scream at somebody, right? We want Nikki Haley to talk about how dumb Vivek makes her feel. Like, those are the things, they delivered those things because that's what they think that's what the audience wants, and to a certain point, it is what the audience wants.
Burgum's referenced an exhausted majority, he calls it, his variation on the silent majority, that probably, the majority of people who are voters, just American citizens, probably don't want that. But where is it missing from the candidates that want to offer that and the ability to convey that and the ability to cultivate that into their party's nomination? I mean, I think, yeah. I don't know where it is.
I don't think it's something that could be solved top down. I think American voters have to start wanting something different, and then it will change.
Yeah, and to come full circle, I mean, it reminds me at the end again of the first debate, because I don't think it was that much different than the first debate. The big winners are Joe Biden and Donald Trump from last night's debate. I mean, there's nothing that changed last night to even slow down this crash course of having those guys at the top of the ticket in November of next year.
And at that point, I mean, I don't think that those choices serve America well. I think on both sides we could have much, much better choices. But again, the people in charge of putting the candidates on the ballot are not, they're not going to choose somebody better. I mean, Biden's basically running unopposed. I don't perceive RFK Jr. as being a better option than Joe Biden.
I don't perceive him as being a Democrat.
Do you guys, I mean, you're both Democrats. Do you think somebody should step up and give Biden a run for his money? Create a competition there?
I don't.
No, I don't.
I think Joe Biden has delivered on exactly what he said he would do last time. And I think he'll continue to deliver on that. Do I think it would maybe be easier politically if they'd put somebody else up? Maybe. But here's the deal. The guy delivered.
Are you afraid that Donald Trump can beat him?
Oh, I think no matter who the candidates are on either side, it's going to be so damn close that, I think Donald Trump can beat a bunch of people. I think Joe Biden could potentially beat a bunch of people. I just think we're so divided. Do those sort of disgruntled, angry anti-Trumpers vote for a Democrat? I don't know. I don't think so if Trump's the nominee.
No. Well, I mean,
I completely concur with Chad, and I just would also add that Biden brings name brand recognition, and for whatever reason in a presidential race, you need to be known, and he is known, and anybody else the Democrats would put up would simply not be as known as Joe Biden.
There's a lot of people, I think, who aren't that involved in politics, who probably just want a feeling of normal. And Biden's a feeling of normal. I mean, he's obviously a long-time name before he ever got into the executive branch, served under President Obama, who was, popularly elected twice, was a very popular president when he was in. With all the chaos going on, they may want to just cling to normal. But I don't know. I think we'd be better off with two different choices, but here we are. We'll put a pin in it there. Gentlemen, thank you. Appreciate it. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.